Europe was at that time setting witches ablaze in mud cottages. Yet a black queen could lead an army of 120,000 men and own trade routes worth billions of dollars in modern currency. Your textbooks had purposely removed her name. She wasn't alone. 5 African queens created such mighty empires that European kings managed to beg to inherit their gold, and then created a new history where they never existed. This is their story. Let's go back, way back. We are talking of a period when the term Europe had little meaning. At the time when Rome was still in its infancy, and Greece was still learning to be democratic in these centuries, and the European landscape was littered with tribal villages. African queens were already ruling armies of thousands, erecting architectural marvels, and controlling trade routes linking 3 continents. Those were not ceremonial puppets wearing crowns on their heads. These were military generals who were leading at the front, economic geniuses that owned the means that made kingdoms rich beyond measures, the creators of civilizations so mature that even when the Europeans finally arrived hundreds of years later, they were literally unable to believe that black people could have created them. But here's the thing, they don't teach you in school. This is where they conveniently leave out the part in any history book that you have ever read. European colonizers did not conquer Africa only. They declared war on African memory as such. They organized the burn of libraries, old texts, melted down golden objects, and demolished temples. They gave cities new names and drew new maps. And when they discovered archaeological remains, of which they could do nothing, they just falsified the history of their origin. They argued that Egyptians were not Africans. They claimed Nubians were more of Middle East. They used to visit the stone cities in Zimbabwe and came out with a pronouncement beyond doubt that Africans could never construct something that is as advanced as the stone cities were. It must have been foreigners. It must have been anyone else. This wasn't accidental. This was policy. Since you are going to put millions of people under slavery, since you are going to colonize a continent and mine its resources over centuries, you have to have an excuse. You must make people think that these people were uncivilized, had no history, no greatness. You have to make everybody believe that you are bringing light to darkness, civilization to savagery. And thus the falsehood was curriculum. The lie became fact. This is the only lie that most people would ever hear. But the truth survived. Within generations of oral histories, at archaeological sites, they were unable to write away. In very old literature authored by Greek, Romans, and Arabs, who brought their own eyes into those kingdoms and wrote on their greatness, and in the legends of 5 queens so strong in their power that even centuries of oblivion could not cover them up. The earliest queen whom we must discuss was the one who lived nearly 3,000 years ago. She was formerly referred to as the Queen of Sheba, but her name was Makoda. She was the ruler of a kingdom which encompassed modern-day Yemen and Ethiopia, and she had something under control that made her incomparably rich: frankincense and myrrh. You must know this, in case you have only heard those words in Christmas carols. These resins were even more valuable than gold in the ancient world. They were applied in religious practices, medicine, perfumes, and embalming. The frankincense trade was the same as it is the case with oil in the modern world. Makita didn't just have money. Her power was such that it was imperative to other rulers. In the Bible, it is described that she paid a visit to King Solomon in Jerusalem. She heard of his wisdom and resolved to put him to trial with difficult questions, with gifts of spices, gold, and precious stones. Political aspect of this visit is omitted in the Sunday school version. This was an international affair between 2 superpowers. Her trade routes were needed by Solomon. She had to evaluate the possibility of making an alliance Ethiopian tradition says that they had a son named Menelik, who was made first emperor of Ethiopia, and whose dynasty kept the empire of Ethiopia 3,000 years. Let that sink in. But this is where the eraser starts. European scholars in their ancient times had maintained that the Queen of Sheba had to be an Arab, and not an African. They could not believe that a black woman was wealthy and intelligent to impress Solomon. They distorted geography, disdained Ethiopian historical writings, and developed plausive theories to fail to give credit where credit was due. Since it is hard to accept that a black African queen was the ruler of one of the wealthiest kingdoms ever known, that she was learned to be as wise as Solomon, and that she was strong to be able to negotiate as an equal, as that will contradict everything they needed people to think about Africa. Contradiction explosion on now, we will jump to circa 40 BCE. It is the heyday of the Roman Empire. The first Roman emperor is Caesar Augustus, who is conquering his land in all directions. Rome is alleged to be invincible, the largest military force that the world has ever witnessed. Then they take into view Queen Ammanis of Kush. Kush, which is now Sudan, was also known as Nubia. It was a prehistoric civilization that was older than Rome itself. They were pyramid-having, pyramid-writing, pyramid-civilized, and they had no desire to be submissive to Rome. Augustus had met his expectation when he attempted to levy tax on Nubia, following conquest of Egypt, and was given a response by Amanirenas. She gathered an army of 30,000 men and went north, and made 3 Roman forts totally ruined. She did not only overpower the soldiers, she sent a message. She cut off the heads of statues of Augustus and buried his bronze head under the steps of one of the temples, in order to people continue to walk on his head forever. By the way, that head is now in the British Museum, but they hardly ever refer to this part of the story. Rome was furious. This was not supposed to occur. They took 10,000 legionnaires south to crush this mutiny, and there was something wonderful. Amanirenas held them to a standoff. This one-eyed warrior queen repelled the largest military machine in the ancient world for 5 years. She applied guerrilla warfare, superior knowledge of the terrain, and tactical genius. Every Roman victory came at a Pyrrhic cost. The conflict was too costly, too bloody, too hard. And so Rome, the supposedly never surrendering empire, did the almost unthinkable. They signed a peace treaty. They waived taxes on Kush. They withdrew their forces. They allowed Amanirenas to remain independent in her kingdom. Think about that for a second. The Roman Empire was defeated by a black African queen. Not in myth, not in legend, not in historical fiction, but in historical reality. It was written about by Roman historians. It is proven by archaeology. And yet how few of us have ever given thought to Amanirenas? How many history courses never teach that Rome lost a war to a Nubian queen? This narrative is shoved into footnotes, while Roman conquest of barbarians gets entire chapters. Because the idea that a black woman could outwit and defeat Roman generals breaks the entire story of Western superiority. Leap forward 1,600 years to the kingdom of Ndongo in what is today Angola. It is 1624, and the Portuguese have arrived with force. They are not exploring. They are not trading as equals. They are hunting slaves to feed the transatlantic trade. And they encounter someone who will make their lives miserable for the next 30 years. Her name is Nzinga. Nzinga was born into royalty and fought for every bit of respect in a world determined to deny it. In her first meeting with the Portuguese governor as her brother's ambassador, he refused to give her a chair. It was a deliberate power move to make her stand or sit on the floor. Nzinga refused to be disrespected. She signaled to one of her servants, who immediately dropped to hands and knees. She sat on her servant's back like a living throne, and she conducted the entire negotiation from that position. The Portuguese thought they could control or bully her, especially after her brother died under suspicious circumstances and she took the throne. They were disastrously mistaken. Nzinga was a military genius who understood European politics better than they expected. She played the Portuguese against the Dutch. She converted to Christianity when it suited her and renounced it when it didn't. She gave refuge to runaway slaves and deserters, and built her army from people with every reason to hate the Portuguese. She used guerrilla warfare, scorched earth tactics, and rear attacks, keeping Portuguese forces in constant suspense. For 30 years she held them off. 30 years of war in which the Portuguese threw everything they had at her and failed to break her. She personally led armies into battle even into her 60s. She signed treaties and broke them when necessary. Every attempt to force her surrender was rejected. At age 80, she died undefeated. She had liberated thousands of enslaved Africans and prevented full Portuguese conquest of her kingdom in her lifetime. And how was she remembered? In history, Portuguese documents called her a witch, a savage, a demon. They could not accept being matched by a black woman, so they demonized her. Her story was hidden or twisted into propaganda about African barbarism for centuries. Only recently have historians begun to acknowledge what she truly was, one of the most brilliant military and political minds of her era, leading a desperate war against an enemy bent on enslaving her people. But we must go even further back to a title, not just one person. In the kingdom of Kush, the word was Candake. In Greek it became Candace. It meant queen, but not just any queen, it meant warrior queen, independent ruler of armies, who made decisions without a king dictating to her. Several Candakes ruled Kush between 300 BCE and 300 CE. Their reputation was so fearsome that conquerors hesitated to invade. When Alexander the Great had conquered almost the entire known world, he reached the border of Nubia and stopped. Ancient sources say he heard of the Candakes and their military strength and decided the battle wasn't worth it. Think about that. Alexander, who crushed Greece to India, who broke the Persian Empire, who was called the Great because he seemed unstoppable, looked at Nubia and said, "No, thank you." The Kushite warrior queens were so formidable that even Alexander feared them. These queens built pyramids. There are actually more pyramids in Sudan than in Egypt, yet most people never learn why. Because it doesn't fit the standard history of African civilization. They ruled armies, monopolized trade, and even minted their own currency stamped with their own faces. They corresponded with other rulers as equals. The Book of Acts in the Bible mentions a Candake, but most interpretations reduce her authority to a mere footnote. These were women with near absolute power in a Greco-Roman world that insisted only men could rule, and yet their lives have been overshadowed, bracketed, or erased from the popular record. Next we come to Queen Amina of Zazzau, ruler of what is now northern Nigeria from 1533 to 1610. During her rise, the trans-Saharan trade routes were the arteries of African commerce. Salt, gold, ivory, and enslaved people flowed through them, making controllers immensely wealthy. Amina decided she would dominate those routes. She personally led her army in conquest after conquest, combining military seizure with strategic alliances. She marched her soldiers onto the battlefield herself, commanding up to 20,000 troops. As she expanded, she built fortified walls around cities, some of which still stand today. They ruled over armies. They monopolized trade. They even printed their own currency with their faces on the coins. They were in communication with other rulers on equal terms. The Book of Acts describes a Candake in the Bible, but in most interpretations, her authority and status are reduced to a brief footnote. These were women who held unlimited power in a world where Greek and Roman authorities decreed only men could rule, and their lives have been overshadowed, bracketed, or wiped from the popular record. Next, I would like to discuss Queen Amina of Zazzau, ruler of present-day northern Nigeria between 1533 and 1610. During Amina's rise, the trans-Saharan trade routes were the lifeblood of African commerce. Salt, gold, ivory, and enslaved people flowed through them, making whoever controlled them extremely rich. Amina decided she would dominate those routes. She led her army in conquest after conquest, mixing military seizure with smart coalitions. She personally marched her soldiers onto the battlefield, commanding up to 20,000 troops. Wherever she conquered, she built fortified walls around cities, and some of those walls still stand today. They remain a reminder of her reign. She ruled for 34 years and never married, because she refused to share power with anyone. Every offer from European traders who came seeking protection pacts to undermine her authority was rejected outright. Her empire became one of the richest kingdoms in West Africa. Her military innovations changed warfare in the region for generations. Even centuries later, when British colonizers arrived and heard her story, they declared she was most likely a myth. It was impossible, they said, for African people to have such a powerful, successful, militarily brilliant queen. It had to be folklore taken to extremes. But oral histories preserved her story in remarkable detail. Forget the archaeological evidence. They said it didn't matter that other documented sources proved her existence. The British needed Africans to appear primitive, uncivilized, and incapable of self-governance. A queen like Amina directly contradicted that narrative. So they labeled her a myth until modern archaeology proved them wrong. Do you see the pattern now? Are you aware of what was done? It wasn't only about conquering the land. It was about conquering memory. Because when people realized their ancestors built empires, governed kingdoms, defeated Roman legions, and controlled wealth that made European kings envious, they will no longer accept being treated as lesser. They will know they've been lied to about their subjugation, and then the records were forced to be burned. Manuscripts in the libraries of Timbuktu, hundreds of thousands of texts on African history, science, literature, were set ablaze. African metallurgical artifacts showing high sophistication in gold work were melted down. Stone buildings were attributed to anyone but the Africans who built them. And the great women who ruled were struck off the record, or reduced to footnotes. Their strength was stripped away, their achievements reduced to nothing. The lie they told was simple. Before Europeans arrived, Africa had no civilization. There was no history worth teaching Africans. Black people had built nothing, created nothing, governed nothing. Everything good must have come from outsiders. This became the justification for slavery. How could it be unjust to enslave people who never made anything themselves? This lie legitimized colonization. Europeans were bringing civilization to darkness. This deceit made theft acceptable, because Africa's resources were in the hands of people not civilized enough to use them, and Africans allegedly were not. But here's the truth they tried to bury. In the 1400s, Europeans arrived in West Africa and found cities that left them astonished. They discovered the Mali Empire larger in GDP than much of medieval Europe. They found Timbuktu, with universities older than Oxford, where students studied mathematics, astronomy, law, and medicine. They encountered bean and bronze castings so advanced. Europeans couldn't understand how it was done and assumed it must be imported. They saw Great Zimbabwe stone constructions, so sophisticated that colonizers spent decades insisting Africans couldn't have built them. It had to be Phoenicians or Arabs. No one believed Africans could create such structures. They discovered Mansa Musa, a black emperor, who went on Hajj to Mecca and gave away so much gold that he crashed the Mediterranean economy. For years afterward, he was simply too wealthy for the existing systems to handle. He built libraries, mosques, universities, and turned Timbuktu into an intellectual center of the Islamic world, all while ruling an empire larger than Western Europe. And they found traces of these 5 queens, and dozens more like them. Women who ruled armies while European women couldn't own property. Women who controlled trade routes, while European women were burned as witches for being too educated. Women who founded dynasties more enduring than some European kingdoms. African civilizations didn't collapse because they were primitive or inferior. The transatlantic slave trade and European colonization systematically destroyed them. An estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were kidnapped and enslaved over more than 400 years. Entire regions were depopulated. Complex political systems were dismantled. Economic structures were reoriented to serve European interests. And once colonizers had extracted the wealth and ruined the societies, they looked at the wreckage. They created and said they were never civilized in the first place. The proof of the lie is all around us if you know where to look. Ancient Greek historians like Herodotus wrote openly about visiting Africa and learning from African scholars. The power of African kingdoms is mentioned repeatedly in the Bible. Kush appears multiple times. Ethiopia is referenced throughout. Nubian empires traded with Roman coins are found in their sites. Medieval Arab scholars described their visits to West African kingdoms in detail. Marveling at the riches and sophistication, there was no hiding the evidence. It was simply swept under the carpet, brushed aside, or redefined to preserve the story of African inferiority. By the 1800s, at the height of colonization, this history was suppressed. It was locked in academic libraries where only scholars could read it. It was removed from school curriculums. It was declared unreliable or exaggerated, because if people knew Africa had queens, ruling empires, while Europe was largely illiterate, how could anyone justify the colonial project? If people realized Africans had sophisticated political structures, advanced architecture, and universities older than Europe's, how could anyone claim they needed European civilization? Remembering is the most revolutionary act. It rejects the whitewashed, sanitized version of history that makes European domination seem natural and inevitable. It means digging up the stories they tried to bury and shouting them so loudly they can no longer be ignored. These 5 queens were not exceptions. They were not rare outliers in a primitive continent. They belonged to advanced cultures that valued women differently. Cultures where women could hold supreme power, where warriors were more than just men, where wealth and learning flourished centuries before Europe emerged from its dark ages. Their stories weren't lost, they were deliberately stolen. In a centuries-long campaign to erase people's memory of how black civilizations built empires, how black rulers were respected by the world's powers, how black people have always had the capacity for extraordinary achievement. We're not systematically oppressed and erased. Writers of history are conquerors. Yes, but the truth survives. It lives in archaeological remains they couldn't fully destroy. It is preserved in oral traditions, passed through generations despite suppression. It lives in ancient texts written before anyone had political reason to deny these kingdoms. And it lives in the DNA of descendants as heirs of queens and emperors, like it or not. Installing a people is a way of taking their future away from them. Unless you know your forefathers built empires, led armies, amassed wealth that made European kings envious, and ruled with wisdom admired by other civilizations, then you might accept the illusion that you are naturally inferior. You might accept enslavement as a natural state of affairs. You might not fight to defend the power that is rightfully yours. But black history is the antidote from the time Arminianus defeated Rome. Danzinga holding off the Portuguese colonizers, from the Kandigs building pyramids, to Amina expanding kingdoms. Each generation has been at war with erasure. Each generation has refused to fade away. Each new generation has kept a fragment of the truth and passed it forward. Your textbooks lied. These queens ruled the world long before Europe even knew the rest of the world existed. They commanded fortunes, status, and authority equal to any of their contemporaries. Forgetting them is not just righting a historical wrong. It is realizing that the current world order, where European and European-descended powers dominate, is not natural or destined. It is the product of specific historical acts of violence, robbery, and obliteration. It is an artificial construct that can and should be questioned. The worst thing you can do to a system built on lies is to tell the truth. The fact that civilizations thrived in Africa when Europe still had villages. The reality that black women governed empires with power that left men in awe. The fact that African success was deliberately written out of history to justify millennia of exploitation. The fact that we carry the lineage of queens. Never forget their names. Know their stories. Never again forget them. Because they did not wage their wars, build their empires, and govern their kingdoms, so their descendants would believe the lies of their oppressors. They did it so we would know, so we would remember, so we would understand that greatness is our inheritance. No matter how many centuries of propaganda try to say otherwise.